Hello, welcome to Hull Noir and our YouTube channel and our series of author interviews. I'm Nick Quantrill, one of the co-founders of the festival. And we started this because we feel it's important, as well as bringing some of the genre's biggest names to the city and online at the moment. We also wanted to champion some new voices in the genre as well through our festival, particularly people around Yorkshire and the North. So we're better to start then with D.L. Marshall, or Danny, who's friends as I hope, as I'm going to call him. And his debut, Anthrax Island, which has just been published by Quantrill Books. So yeah, congratulations, Manny. It's a brilliant, brilliant debut. I found it very, very vivid and exciting and dangerous. Tell us a little bit about it to start with before we get into the meat of the book.
Well, for anyone that doesn't know about Anthrax Island, it is a real place. Anthrax Island is what the media dubbed it when the files were declassified in the 90s. It's an island, Grignard Island, just off the northwest coast of Scotland. And it was used for biological weapons testing in the Second World War. And the bad thing about anthrax is it sticks around for a while. So this island off Scotland stayed contaminated for decades, lethally so. Nobody could go there. It was off limits. And the premise of the book really is that this anthrax contamination has resurfaced as a resurgence of anthrax on the island. A team of scientists have gone to undertake some sampling and find out what's going on when their technician dies in strange circumstances, and enter our hero Tyler, who's flown in to investigate the problem with the bases, finds out his predecessor was murdered, and it all sort of spirals from there.
Yeah, excellent. And it's a very, very immersive opening to the book as well. As you say, we meet John Tyler during that opening chapter when he arrives via a helicopter. Just how isolated is the island? Is that the only way you can kind of access it? Would be through a helicopter?
It's fairly isolated. So I drove up there, not to the island. Wouldn't be a very good island if you could drive to it. But I drove up there in November a few years ago to do a bit of research, and you go as far as Inverness, which is pretty far for most people in the country. It's far enough, and then it's another couple of hours north of there. So it's really pretty far up and pretty wild. There is a nearby village, and it's quite near Ullapool, which is probably the nearest decent sized place that people know. But yeah, not a lot of people go there for obvious reasons.
Yeah. So was that opening scene always the opening scene in the book? Because I think it's so kind of scene setting, isn't it? You know, it really kind of throws you straight into the story. Was that always the start for you?
It was always going to be the opening, and it was the first thing I wrote as well. Was the opening scene. There's a scene where he's ferried across to the island by a Navy boatman, and the whole thing, when I wrote it, I wrote it sort of as horror, and almost like the opening of Dracula with Jonathan Harker going through the Carpathian Mountains and the villagers telling him not to go there and warning him away, and the coachman won't take him any further, that kind of thing, you know. It was the very first thing I wrote.
Yeah, tell us a bit more then about John Tyler as the protagonist of the story, because he's obviously very clearly a hero, but he's also quite a dark character as well. Like, there's not an awful lot we know about him at the start of the book, and it kind of slowly unveils itself as you read. How much can you tell us about him without kind of spoiling it too much for readers?
Without spoilers, yeah, he's not a particularly nice chap. He's more of an anti-hero. He's will do whatever needs to be done to get the job done. In this case, he's a technician that's been flown in to repair a problem with the base, with the decontamination chambers that the scientists are using on the island, and he discovers sabotage, and that's where the start of the story kicks off from. But I don't know how much to say without spoiling a lot of the things, but he doesn't mess about.
No, and there's hints in it that there's a darker past there. You know, we kind of see things about the tattoos on his body, don't we, and the wounds that he's suffered in the past, and that kind of drops a few hints, maybe, doesn't it, as to
he does. He sort of drops hints throughout, and he drops more hints as the story goes on, and you gradually find out a little more about him until fairly near the end, you discover quite a lot about his past and about his future, I guess, as well.
Yeah, and I think there's a sense that the remoteness as well of the setting of the story kind of suits him as well as a personality. You know, he seems like the kind of person who maybe seek out them type of places to find
Mm.
himself. You say that
I
was
think, yeah, and that I think that is. I wouldn't like to say that I'm Tyler by any stretch. I'm no action hero, but he's that bit of him is for sure comes from me. I live very close to the moors. Where I live in West Yorkshire, I can go 5 minutes in any direction, and I'm up on the moors, and there's nobody around, and you can walk and not see anyone all day. And he's very much at home in those sort of situations.
yeah. Yeah, that was kind of an interesting point because I was reading it thinking, is Danny kind of part of his character within Tyler? And there's that sense of, although the story's set in a very remote location in Scotland, Tyler's a kind of a Yorkshireman, isn't he? He's a gruff Yorkshireman, and there's a lot of black humour that comes through as well. So which kind of gives a bit of light to the dark, I think. Was there a sense of kind of bringing that Yorkshireness out in the character for you?
Tried to, yeah. There's a few choice phrases in there that I think are fairly local, and his way of looking at the world is definitely very cynical character. I suppose a lot of that comes from me as well, but I think that's probably where it ends. The moors and sarcasm. That's all I've given him.
Yeah, I think he's from Halifax as well. It says in the book, doesn't it? Which kind of ties
It
in with your
does.
background as well.
It does. I threw that in there, so it wasn't originally going to be in there, and I put it in there because there's a bit of a joke. He says Halifax. Somebody says Halifax, and he says it's Halifax. It's the H is silent, which anyone local will understand that it's Halifax. But that comes from a real conversation that I had with somebody when I was maybe about 19, 20, with somebody in an officer's mess when I was applying to join the Navy at that time, and he said, "Where'd you come from?" And I said, "Halifax." And we had that's where that conversation came from, and I just thought it'd be nice to work it into the book as a little anecdote. So that's why he sort of came from there, really.
Yeah, and so was it a deliberate, and that kind of shielding of his past in the story, is that a deliberate attempt to kind of give you enough layers to peel back for future stories involving Tyler? Is that the plan?
We'll definitely find out more about him as stories progress. There is a sequel that I'm working on at the moment, so in the final stages of, that's penciled in to come out in November, where we'll find out a lot more about certain elements of his past.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more then about the island itself. Grunyard Island, I'm not very good at getting my flat Yorkshire vowels around that either, I don't think. But how much of the novel is grounded in reality in terms of the actual life on the island? Did you manage to get any kind of access in any way, maybe through research or even managing to kind of get on site even, or is it?
Personally, no, I've not been on the island. People have, so it's been declared anthrax free, although some people aren't so sure. But no, I just research. There's so much online. There's some fantastic sites out there, particularly with the true history of Grunyard Island. There's so many sort of conspiracy theories around it. I've got a fantastic magazine from the 60s that I bought from eBay. And it's got a huge article about Grunyard, which was written, so bear in mind it was written in the 60s. At that time, the files hadn't been declassified, and they were speculating what had been tested on the island and things like that. So all this sort of mythology of what happened, and they'd spoken in the article to various eyewitnesses who, at the time, it was only 20 years after the tests themselves had happened. So real eyewitness testimony of what they were watching through their binoculars as these people from the Ministry of Defence were crawling all over the island.
Fantastic. And I think one of the other very appealing things as a reader for the novel is that by setting the story on an island, it becomes a lot of mystery, isn't it, effectively? There's only a certain number of suspects who could have killed the engineer, and there's only so many set number of motives you can play with and so on. Was that something in your mind when you was writing the story? Did you want to kind of tap into that? I guess it's an Agatha Christie sort of tradition, isn't it?
Very much so, yeah. There's that whole "and then there were none." vibe that you get with islands a lot of the time. Yeah, I think I originally pitched it a long time ago as, and I got told off for saying it. I'll tell you why. I pitched it as an Agatha Christie novel rewritten by Alistair MacLean on the set of The Thing, and I got told off. I said never compare yourself to Agatha Christie, which is fair, I think. But yeah, it definitely. It's probably my favorite Agatha Christie novel, and then there were none. So there's definitely huge influence.
Yeah, who told you off for that?
It was somebody, I won't say who, but I was pitching it at Bloody Scotland at the time.
Okay.
And it was somebody on the panel at Bloody Scotland.
Yeah, but that was in your mind essentially, to have that locked room mystery. Tell us a bit more then about some of the other characters on the island, because when Tyler gets there, as you say, the original engineer who was replacing it is found murdered. And there's kind of like a cast, isn't there, of other scientists and other engineers on the island from different nationalities. What was you trying to achieve with that cast of characters?
I wanted an international cast because I wanted it to feel like you couldn't fully relate to certain other characters on the island, to sort of play into that. We don't know who we can trust. So I wanted them all to be kind of slightly odd. There's the sort of, on the surface, stereotypical characters there for the sort of the army guy who thinks he's in charge, the civilian scientist who also thinks he's in charge, and then various other scientists of differing nationalities who all have, well, some of them have slightly different reasons for being on the island and secrets themselves.
Yeah, was that international aspect of it always an important part of the book? Was that kind of there at the beginning? Because you know, like we meet like a Russian scientist, don't we? And that kind of plays into a lot of contemporary issues, doesn't it, around nation states and certainly in big kind of government sort of state agencies, doesn't it? There's a lot of questions around these type of organisations, isn't there? I think that's something the book plays with really neatly as well.
Yeah, no, it always was from when I very early on sat down to sort of plan out the cast of characters. They were always international. Yeah, I like the kind of, it's just an extra little layer of mystery, I think.
Yeah, no, I think we spoke about Agatha Christie's been an influence, and you mentioned Alistair MacLean in passing. Was he a big influence? Because it has that kind of old school feel, doesn't it, of being an international thriller. I mean, and that's his name kind of popped up on the online reviews as well, I think, and some of the blurbs and so on. Was he someone that you looked to in terms of influence?
Absolutely, yeah. I've got I don't know, this shelf and this shelf are almost entirely Alistair MacLean. Until fairly recently, you know, a good few years ago, maybe a decade ago, I didn't really read a lot from before the 90s, really. Sorry, from after the 90s. I purely read sort of 60s and 70s thrillers and horror. And it's only in the last sort of 10 years or so, with a few exceptions, that I've really started reading a lot of contemporary stuff. So yeah, huge influence.
Yeah, what is it about MacLean's work then? That kind of, what is it that you kind of wanted to take from his work as an influence and work into Anthrax Island?
I love in early MacLean books, the protagonist's always battling a couple of different things. He's always obviously trying to uncover a plot and battling the bad guy, but he's always also battling against nature in all the best of those thrillers. And I wanted to kind of capture a certain sense of that. There's a harsh environment, probably one of the harshest, given that if you eat some of the soil or breathe anything in there, then it's likely to kill you. So I wanted to capture that sense of, he's not only fighting against the bad guys here, but nature as well.
Is that something that you think you'll take forward in your work as well? Because I'm you know, you said there's going to be another Tyler book. Will that be kind of like the selling point, if you like, of those novels, that they will inhabit those really hostile environments and terrains? Is that kind of the feeling?
I'd like to, because I think, yeah, again, it brings that extra edge to it. I know the direction it's going in, and the sequel that comes out in November, I can say does follow similar lines, and I won't say too much about it, but a lot of it takes place on a small freighter in the middle of the Bay of Biscay in winter. So in the middle of a storm. So again, almost an island again, but this one moves.
Fantastic. And just to pick up on some of those research bits we touched upon, how much of that, the kind of the engineering stuff as well was really kind of fascinating to me, as somebody who can't even kind of like screw in a light bulb without kind of making a complete mess of the job. How much was that kind of you coming into the story again? Because I've seen pictures on your Twitter tinkering with your classic cars and stuff like that. Is that kind of something you wanted to feed into the novels, into Tyler himself?
I suppose that's something else that I've given Tyler, yeah, is cars. I'm a big car fan, and I've always had fairly old cars. I've always worked on them myself, so yeah. I've always enjoyed doing that. Again, I wanted that sense of there's a few times in the book where he sort of has to make do with what he can lay his hands on, and that again is sort of plays into that similar thing of he's handy. He knows he can make a bomb out of a phone charger in a plant pot. He's
a resourceful guy, isn't he? I think. Yeah. So where was the line for you between fact and fiction? Because we were spoken about how anthrax can kind of kill you from touching and inhaling it on the island. So, and you kind of get that across really well in the novel. But was you having to kind of use your imagination at a certain point in terms of what it would be like to be on that island and how it must be to live day to day as a scientist or an engineer?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, a lot of the decontamination procedures, I did research.
Right.
So a lot of for instance, the chemicals that they use, the way that they clean themselves, the way they clean the ground, and they decontaminate the island, the techniques that they're researching, that's all fact. Some of the drugs they use to treat anthrax and things like that, I researched. There's bits of that in the novel. So yeah, that's all fact. There are obviously, I've taken some elements one step further. But I think so. One of the things hinges around the way that anthrax mutates in the wild, and again grounded in fact in the way that they engineer bioweapons usually is to grow mutations through series of animals in a lab, and that's how they grew the anthrax strain that was used by Porton Down to do these experiments. And if you take that one step further and assume that the island has remained contaminated for decades, and any animals living there would be a kind of a natural petri dish, and what could that anthrax have mutated into? And unfortunately, we're now all familiar with that sort of thing.
Yeah. Did you get any specialist help in the research? Did you manage to kind of speak to any, I guess, kind of anthrax specialists, or
No, I read a lot, and I've done a hell of a lot of research on the Imperial War Museum archives, which are fantastic because since all these files were declassified, they've put all sorts of stuff on the Imperial War Museum archives that you can search or that you can request. And there are videos that you can watch of the tests taking place themselves, the sheep and the scientists on the island. They filmed everything, these top secret films, and you can find parts of them and watch them, and that's a fantastic resource. But when I was editing it with my editor, he said that I think it was his sister-in-law or somebody he was fairly closely related to, actually worked at Porton Down or was involved with Porton Down in some way, and he was going to get them to look over aspects of it, and they came back and gave it a bit of a thumbs up. So that's good.
Yeah, job's a good one. How about the publication? Was it a book that took a long time to write and then find a home, or did you kind of write it kind of very quickly and then things escalated from there?
No, it took a long time to get it published. I originally put pen to paper in, I think it was late 2015. So five years before I signed a contract. And it went through various stages before that. I think I did what I think everyone does when you're new, and I sent it out to agents far too early, and it wasn't ready. And I thought at the time that it was fantastic, and it wasn't. It needed more work. And I managed to, through Harrogate festivals, actually, I entered an auction, a charity auction, and I won. The prize was to be mentored by Mari Hanna, and so she worked with me on it and helped me sort of find my own voice. So she worked with me on the first sort of 2 or 3 chapters, and it evolved from there. And I kind of carried that through into the rest of the book and used what she'd sort of taught me there. And then in 2000, and I think it was 18, I won a prize through New Writing North, which kind of helped me along that road as well. Yeah. So then I finally got an agent with Anthrax Island a couple of years ago, and we did a bit of work on it and submitted it, and yeah, signed the contract.
Brilliant. When you say you kind of got it to a stage and submitted it, you know, with hindsight too early, but you thought it was brilliant, can you kind of pinpoint what it was that was wrong, kind of looking back at that, what the problem was in the story?
Yeah, I can, and thankfully I think I can shortcut that process in future. But it was it was just I think it was too slow in the opening. It was sagged a little bit in the middle. It didn't the story was the same, but I think it didn't have quite as much tension, and probably too much dialogue, not enough action, not enough tension. The interesting thing was, when I originally wrote it, it was set in 1982. So, and quite a few people who've read it said it's got a bit of a retro vibe to it. And I originally wrote it set in 1982, and there were all kinds of nods and references to the 80s and all sorts. I did so much research on that got binned because I moved it to be set now. But some of that feel I kept. So, for instance, towards the end, he drives a Ford Capri, and I liked it, so I kept it.
Why not?
Why not?
Yeah. So that's interesting, because obviously, if you'd have set it in 1982, that was, as you say, when the island had been decontaminated and so on. What made you change it to become a contemporary story?
So I just thought I was narrowing down the audience a little too much by setting it in the 80s. I liked it. I'm a big fan of all things retro, and I like books, I like TV shows set in the 80s. You know, Stranger Things, one of the biggest series ever. So I love all of that. But some people don't. Some people want to read about things set now, and it was holding me back a bit much. The other thing that I thought that really swayed it was, how do I carry on a series set in the 80s? Because the reason I'd set it in 1982 was it had to take place around the time that the island was actually being decontaminated by Porton Down. So that governed the timeline, and I just found a way to set it now instead. If the island was still contaminated now, or like I found a way for it to be contaminated, then there was really no other reason to set it in the 80s. And I thought a series would be much better to carry through set in the present day, because there's so much more I can do with it. So I'm glad I did. But there is an early copy that's set in 1982 up in my attic.
Yeah, like a DVD extra type of thing. And one last question, I think, before we wrap up, Danny. If you can kind of take the book onto the screen, have you got in mind who would play John Tyler? Is there an actor in your head when you write the story that would be a good?
Like, there is. That the way I write, and I'm quite a visual person, anyway. And the way I write is I watch it in my head and then just type out what's happening. So I've watched a TV show of Anthrax Island already, and just typed it up, and that's the book. So I know who everybody is in my head, which is from what other writers say. I think that might be a strange way of going about it, but yeah, I absolutely know who John Tyler is. I don't know if I should say or not. I don't know if you'll know it. There's a chap called I'll tell you. And then one day, if I'm really lucky, we might look back on it and see
Yeah,
if this is the same guy. There's a chap called Matthew McNulty. He's an actor who's, I think, from Manchester. Did you ever watch a BBC series called The Musketeers a couple of years ago?
No.
It was sort of a family show, Musketeers reboot, and he played a bad guy in that, and he was a sort of an assassin, and he was an awful person. But I thought he's John Tyler. Plus him playing the bad guy from Musketeers is John Tyler.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Danny, for coming and sharing this with us tonight. Anthrax Island is available now. Please go on and buy it, everybody. Thank you very much, Danny.
Thank you.
Thank you.